Well, it's funny in the middle. We all say that we want to die at peace, at home. I like to add with the dog licking my fingers. Most of us don't. 70% of us die in institutions. See, there's a difference between dying at peace and dying in peace. At peace refers to our existential and emotional state at the time we die. In peace refers to ours and our family's experience of our demise over its days, weeks, and months. These are my folks, Mort and Ruth Greenberg. We were a small advanced planned family, the folks, my sister Judy and myself. For most of Mom's 80 years and Dad's 84 years, medicine worked really well in their lives, but not at the end of their lives. In 2004, Mom suffered sudden respiratory collapse. It was complete. She was intubated, placed on a machine ventilator in the ICU. The days became weeks, and she lay comatose while we tried what ultimately was a futile treatment option to bring her blood oxygen levels up. At the end of 3 weeks, the average length of a terminal hospitalization, we had to unplug her, and she died. No one in that ICU consoled us. No one came to turn off the alarms. We turned them off ourselves. 14 months later, Dad self-admitted for pacemaker eligibility testing. His weakened heart did not fare well under that chemical stress, and he wound up catheterized in a bed. He acquired hospital-caused urinary tract MRSA, a hospital superbug, which migrated to his blood and lodged in his wrist. It took 2 weeks to diagnose that, and the treatment plan at that point was very simple. A simple surgery to drain the infection and see if he can turn around and go home. Now, his condition was very severe, but he was lucid half the time, and we all agreed, yes, let's do it. And he had one stipulation: no intubation. I discussed this with the doctors. They never really went the distance with me, although I thought I went the distance with them. They said no can do. They didn't provide any options for us, and it took me 18 months later that I learned there were options that we could have used at the time. But there were none then, and we admitted Dad to hospice. He admitted himself, and 4 days later, he died. I wish I could say something good about each of these hospitalizations, but I can't. They were characterized by absence. On our part, the absence of knowledge, because we were dying newbies. On medicine's part, the absence of communication, disclosure, forecasting, guidance, interest, monitoring, compassion. All told, the absence in our felt experience of care. And I now refer to these 6 weeks as the crucible, a place of severe test or trial where the heat is up and there is no escape. And I said, never again in my family. And I made 2 vows. One, to get to the bottom of the failures, the families, my own, and medicine's. And 2, if what I learned when I got there was not already expressed in the world, that I would do the best I could to bring it forth. Every provider I subsequently spoke with upped the ante. They said the same thing, that more than 50% of us are at greater of 50% risk of experiencing the same problems that my patient family did twice in a row with the only parents I had. Now, 2.5 million Americans die every year, and many more millions of family members are impacted because of those deaths. Perhaps they're haunted. All in all, it represents far too much and very unnecessary pain. It took me 3 years to write and publish Notes from the Waiting Room, which is a layperson's unique analysis and guidance for how to manage any hospitalization and to revision end of life to support our goal. We all say that we want to die in peace. I asked then, and I continue to ask, fundamental questions. Why do we fail? Who owns your dying? And what does dying in peace require of you and of me? Essentially, it's simple. It requires that we recognize and overcome obstacles to dying in peace. It's easier said than done because they are many and very, very intense. Any of them are tipping points. Here are the 5 big ones that tripped my family up twice. We failed to recognize prior medical engagement as heroic. You know, the double bypass, the hip job, the stent insertions, and on at an accelerating pace as you age. And if you don't recognize that you've already acted to save a life or sanctify life, then you'll never stop rescuing. And if you or a loved one has trouble answering the question, when is enough enough? I would wager that failing to recognize prior heroic engagement is part of the trouble. We were exposed to medical error, and it is now known to be among the top causes of death in America. Number 3, actually, behind heart failure and cancer. 200,000 of us are dying in this country every year to medical error. That's the equivalent of several jumbo jets worth of Americans going down day in and day out, year in and year out. But you know, I've never seen medical error included in these top 10 causes of death charts that pop up from time to time in medicine and academia. And since the folks died, out of interest and engagement, I have attended quite a few end-of-life panel discussions, hosted typically in an evening, where the public comes to hear what providers have to tell us. And I have yet to hear medical error mentioned as a risk factor that we should consider. It's time we be told. Resuscitation snafus are the hugest obstacle in my experience, and they range over a continuum. We are grateful when life is saved in minutes on the street. We appreciate when life is sustained for hours during surgery in the operating room. The tipping point comes when it morphs into the technology is this, and protocols are used for ongoing treatment over days or weeks. And this is a reflexive transition in medicine. And once we have made it, you may know, it is so, so hard to back out. The trouble is that over all of the continuum, myriad institutional policies, provider inclinations, overrides to our directives, and our own hearts commingle to confuse and extend this scenario. We also overestimate the effectiveness of advanced directives. You know, sit down at the dining table, have the talk, sign a living will at the very least. Better yet, to sign 6, 8, 10 legal documents that only together comprise a loosely woven safety net under us. But you know, they provide a false sense of security, as challenging and as important as this is to do. They don't eliminate the other obstacles, and they don't do a whole lot to help us anticipate and overcome them. And over all of it is learning how to advocate medically. We didn't know. We thought we learned the ropes during mom's hospitalization, but we were wrong. We learned during dad's hospitalization. This is 1/3 of my medical library. Half of this shelf are books by lay people, the best half, which I will return to the next time I need to act as a medical proxy. I wish it were simpler, but the best guidance I can give you for accessing these is to tap into the e-patient and empowered patient communities. Get any one of these wrong, it'll put the kibosh on dying in peace. Get anyone right, you'll have a better chance. And then add dysfunctional family dynamics, religious matters, financial duress. All in all, it's an absurd quandary. And one day I had the strange idea to set this quandary to music. So here it is. Want to die at peace, got to die in peace, all of one piece. Say pretty please, want to go in grace with a neutral face. We're done this race, no got to stay in place. Beyond ready to depart, jump jack your bones and shock your heart when you're picking at the air. No bro ma'am, you ain't going nowhere. There's an app for that. Windrum's never say die rap. Independent thinker, no one's rube, shove in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tubes with C, diff, MRSA, gurgle, gurgle, and all I want to do is cuddle and snuggle. There's no app for that. Windrum's never say die rap. And in the annals of stupidity, death panels twist, are talking free, can't touch the sky, see or be seen, ain't living, ain't dying, don't mean to be mean. When death comes knocking, my clock tick-tocking, hey everybody, day you sex smart in a rap about that. Windrum's never say die rap. Now, it ain't just medicine in our way. If you don't talk, you don't get no say. Call 911 when it's time to pass. Blocking our own path, pain in our own ass. Take a number for that. Windrum's never say die rap. My friend Steve Price RN says dying is dying. His songs are cool. Steve ain't lying. Chart your glide path while there's time to die in peace with minimal crying. Study up. Make some sense of 21st century impediments. Time to grow up before you grow old. There's more to dying than you've been told. Wishing won't help us turn the page, so 16 new terms to engage. I have a matrix for that. Windrum's never say die rap. Windrum's never say die rap. Windrum's never say die rap. Thank you. You know, we actually can have a little fun. It's a bit snarky, but I like the rap. And I didn't even press this button. But here's what happened. I was actually working on this when the idea of the rap occurred to me. And this is the 6th obstacle. It's a new obstacle that just occurred to me last fall. And I think if we overcome this obstacle, it'll help us anticipate and overcome all the others. So I'd like to delve into it a little bit, this business of having trouble distinguishing among dying outcomes. Because there's more than just one today. It's a complex world. So imagine this. In our world of thousands of flowers, imagine that no flower has a name. And the only word that we could use to refer to any or all of them is this one word, flower. How could we state our preferences? How could we discuss the differences? How could we plan bouquets? Likewise, this one word dying fails completely to forecast or describe the range of dying experiences ahead of all of us. Think of it like this. As you move your token across a game board, when your game stops, man, where do you land? Or if you're dancing across a ballroom's tiled dance floor, when the music stops, ma'am, where do you land? Well, when we are diagnosed as terminal, or we make a terminal self-assessment, we enter this zone where time becomes crucial, right? Whether it's an unanticipated 3-week terminal hospitalization or a 6 to 12-month period, time is the issue. In the near term, we might die instantly, or our death might be precipitated by medical error. In the far term, we might never die, persistent vegetative state, or death may take so many years as to feel like never dying, or drain a patient family of every single resource that they possess. And in the middle is medically managed dying, which itself has an onset, a progression, and an end stage. And in all of it, all we want to do is to die in peace. Yet something or someone always controls. If the world controls, we may not have anything at all to do with how we die. Medicine is the mainstream control. Life support equipment is what we say we don't want to control. Maybe you'd like to control your own dying. What would that be like? Maybe we like to share control, and if so, with who and who leads. And again, through the whole of it, all we want to do is to die in peace. So we enter this zone and we move through it, and where we land is the essential nature of the dying experience that the patient family has. Where controls intersect time, I call landings. Do you see how this one word dying fails completely to map this territory? There are no place names on this map. We can't say where we've been, where we are, where we're going, where we'd like to avoid. So I worked this, and I developed after 5 tries what I call Windrum's matrix of dying terms, which so far as I know for the first time both identifies and objectively names the full range of 16 dying outcomes ahead of us, all of us here in the 21st century. Now at first glance, some people see this and they say, Bart, this is so complicated, you're making it complicated, or it's abstract. And I say, no, it's not. Because we all know sets of 16 names. 16 friends or family members, 16 flowers, 16 spices, 16 software properties, 16 chemical elements. And each of these names refer to distinctly different things. So too with the matrix. These names refer to distinctly different dying outcomes. Here are some from my experience. We experienced Dad's death as erroneous dying under medical control. We experienced Mom's death as indeterminate dying under machine control for a medium period of time. Now, indeterminate comes from medical anthropology, and it refers to being artificially suspended between 2 states, neither living nor dying. Based on my weeks in the crucible, I will aim for intentional dying under shared control, by which I mean the early use of palliative pain relief treatment and early enrollment into a hospice program, not for the last 4 days of life, because hospice is a renewable 6-month resource for the entire patient family that more often than not extends good living at the end of life. Regardless, because of my time in the crucible, I no longer trust the gears of medicine to mesh smoothly, safely, on time, or with care. And I want a fallback, which I call released or dignified dying, depending on the timing, under personal control. This generally, not always, but generally, refers to aid in dying available in states or nations that have enacted death with dignity statutes. If I were to make a personal map out of the matrix, this would be mine, where green-blue landings are those with which I'm okay and for which I will aim. And red landings are those with which I am not okay and which I will try my best to avoid. So this is the final matrix in its formal form, and there's a color overlay. Now, just as matters of law and ethics color our lives, they also color the matrix. Green landings are those that are almost everywhere legal or considered by the mainstream to be ethical, even if the outcomes are horrendous. Green-gray blends means it depends on circumstances and interpretation. And gray landings are those that almost everywhere are either illegal or considered by the mainstream to be unethical. Now, the matrix is value neutral. It just shows what is. And when I developed this and sat back and looked at it, I thought, you know, out of all 16 possible dying outcomes ahead of us, the only two that are either illegal or considered by the mainstream to be unethical happen to be those two that potentially place dying under our direct personal control. And here, I want to respond to an otherwise sensitive TEDx talk given last year by an Australian doctor who referred to these outcomes, using different names, as a sideshow that did not matter. And I have to ask, if the only two dying outcomes of 16 that potentially put dying under our personal control are going to be called a sideshow, then I think we need to ask what is happening to millions of American families and more millions worldwide under the medical big top, and what is our role in that? For now, here's the takeaway. Neither your wishes, spiritual engagement, or medicine's promises alone or together will necessarily result in peaceful dying. We need to be more deliberate in aiming for the deaths we want and away from the deaths we don't want. This weekend is particularly meaningful for me because it happens to be the 8th anniversary of my dad's death. And I wound up on memory lane as I was preparing this talk. I found an unexpected connection there, which I'd like to close with. In the 70s and 80s, my folks owned a Sir Speedy print shop down in Denver. My sister Judy and I worked there by turns. It was called Quick Printing. You'd walk in, place your order, hang out at the counter with a cup of coffee, and 15 minutes later, leave with your copies. It was personalized printing. It was state-of-the-art at the time. One day, Dad walked in with a box of yellow buttons. He put that box on the edge of the counter. Whenever a customer would walk in the door, man, woman, or beast, he'd grab a button, he'd go out to greet them, and he'd pop them the question. That question was out of bounds. Mom let him get away with it. I looked on in astonishment and sometimes jealousy, and the customers had a good time. You probably get the idea that I ask a lot of questions. And among them is wondering, what would the folks think about what I do and what I say since they died? I think Mom would say, I don't know about that rap. I think Dad would say, I had no idea I bequeathed you that question. And I understand it's repurposing. It was out of bounds when I asked it, but in the last 40 years, our dying territory has expanded so much that now this question, asked in a new way, is right in the middle of the ball field. I think if Dad could, he would shuffle on out here with his walker and that grin, and he'd reach into his pocket and back 38 years, and he'd hold out the button, and he'd pop you the question. Would you like a quickie? I am not making this up. I couldn't do it. I have one remaining button at home. Would you like a quickie? But you know what? It's shorthand for what I think is the profound question of our age. Is protracted dying the necessary cost of extended living? Who owns your dying? Who controls? What is required of you and of me to die in peace? I think the obstacles, the impediments are so many, so huge, so rapid, and so weighty in their result as to require from all of us acts of citizenship. So I say, study up, make some sense of 21st century impediments. Time to grow up before we grow old. Want to die at peace? Got to die in peace. Rainer Maria Rilke, the 20th century poet, said it beautifully and succinctly in his masterwork, the Sonnets to Orpheus. Be ahead of all parting. be ahead of all parting. Yes, it's a challenge, but guess what? You're young, or young at heart. We've got the time, and you can do it. It's up to each of us and all of us to change this paradigm. Thank you.